The first part of this lesson is on function notation, and the second part will be on domain and range. If you look at the two columns, you'll see that the left column are the equations are written in regular notation that you're used to with an x and a y. The right side column is written in function notation. What's the difference? You might notice that on the left side of the equal sign, we have a y in regular equations, but on the left side of the equal sign in function notation, we have something new. We read these as f of x, g of x, and h of x. Now you might think that in parentheses means you're multiplying that x to the f, the g, or the h. But f, g, and h are not variables. You're not plugging anything into those letters. You still are using the x to plug in a number, but the f, g, and h are the names of these equations. So this first equation is function is called f. This second function equation is called g, and this one is called h. I know it looks complicated, but I promise you that f of x means the same thing as y. This is another way to write the same equation. Why does it help us? Well, there's a few reasons which you'll see, but in one way it just helps us identify which equation I'm talking about. The function f is this first one. The function g is the second one, and the function h is the third one in this case. So what does it mean? F, in this case, the name of the function, it is often f, g, or h, but it could use any letter except for whatever the variable is being used in the equation. Normally that's x. The letter in the parentheses, again, usually x, it tells you what the input is. Remember, a function is input and output. You plug something in, you get something out. On the right side of the equation, we have the function rule. It tells you what the function does. In this case, this function multiplies 2 to the input, which is x. If you look at these, this is how we use function notation. You may be asked to evaluate something like f of 4. That says for the function called f, we're going to use an input of 4. So we literally take the 4 and plug it in wherever we see an x. F of 4 is equal to 5 times 4. Remember that a number and a letter next to each other mean multiply, and anytime we're plugging in, it's a good rule of thumb to use parentheses to remind us that we've plugged a number in there. When we multiply 5 times 4, we get 20. We can do the same thing here. Here's a function called f of t. I told you you could use any letter to name the function or as your input. In this case, they didn't use x, they used t. But still, f of 4 means replace the input with 4. So I replace the t with 4. F of 4 is equal to, plug in a 4, plus 2. 4 plus 2 is 6. So f of 4 is equal to 6. For the next one, it looks a little harder, but again, all you're doing is plugging 4 in for the input. In this case, the input is A. So everywhere you see an A, plug in a 4 and get an answer. And when you do that, carefully follow order of operations, you get 29. F of 4 is equal to 29. So how do we read and interpret function notation? It's kind of like a puzzle. The notation looks complicated, but if you think of it in terms of input and output, X and Y, it's really pretty simple. Input is X, output is Y. Remember, this is what you plug in and what you get out. That's all. So f of -2 means when I plug in -2, I get y, which in this case, is 4. Look, when you have an x and a y, that's an ordered pair. When you plug in -2, you get 4. Look at the graph, -2, 4. It's a point on the graph. And this will always work. Anytime you see this notation, it represents an input and an output, an X and a Y. And if either one of them was missing, but you had a graph, you could give me the value that is missing. F of -1 equal to 3.5 means when X is -1, Y is 3.5. When X is -1, Y is 3.5. Try the other two. Write the ordered pair, the point, like I did here, and then locate it on the graph and see if you're correct. Pause the video and then start to check your work. Okay, how'd you do? So when X is 0, Y is 3. The point 0, 3 is on the graph. When X is 2, Y is -1. 2, -1. 2, -1 is on the graph. Let's take a look at another way you may see this. We'll try one together, and then you'll try a couple on your own. So in this case, we're given a function called g. G of x is equal to 4x minus 7, and we're asked to find g of -2. Don't get worried. All this means is to plug in -2 for your input instead of x. So they've already written g of -2. I see wherever I have an x, I'm going to plug in a -2, and I'm going to do it in parentheses, because you don't want 4 and -2 written next to each other without parentheses. It'll look like 4 minus 2. Remember, 4 times -2 is -8 minus 7, and you can do this in the calculator, is -15. So that means g of -2 is equal to -15. Try it. Use the calculator. Desmos is fine to do the math, but write it out by plugging in whatever input they give you. Pause the video and give it a shot, and then come back and check your work. Okay, how did you do? You may not have had this center part because you might have used the calculator. I wrote this out doing the multiplication first and then subtracting 7. Let's take a look at how this looks in Desmos. If you look at Desmos, I've gone ahead and put this in. G of x equals 4x minus 7. It graphs the line, and then I asked Desmos using a table for what happens when x is -2, 1/2, and 0. And you'll notice that we get the same answers. We have to. Desmos just knows how to do the work. When you plug in -2, you get out -15. And when you plug in 1/2, you get out -5. And when you plug in 0, you get out -7. And so each of those points is on the line on the graph, just like it was on the last slide we did, where we were interpreting function notation directly from the graph. So now we've looked at how to use function notation by interpreting it from a graph and by using an equation for the function. But you also may be asked to do this using a table. And so I'm given a table describing the function f. Notice I have a horizontal table here. The first row is x. The second row is y, which is the same thing as f of x. And so remember, when you're asked for f of -3, we're saying x is -3. So you look in the x row for the -3 and you figure out what y is. It's 2, and that means that your y, your answer, your output is 2. So when you have something in place of the x, all you have to do is look for it in the x column and write the corresponding f of x value. Remember, this means y, the answer, the output. If it's the other way around, if they give us the answer, they're telling us what the y is. They're saying f of x equals 9. They're asking us for x. What is the input? So now you're looking for the 9 in the y row, the f of x row. And you're going backwards to find what the x is. X is 2. Okay, so look, here they gave you the x. So you find it in the x column and you look for the y. Here they gave you the y. You're working backwards to look for the x. Try the rest of these problems on your own. Pause the video and then come back and check your work. All right, how'd you do? Check your work. Notice that there's a couple with no solution. So when you look for f of -1, the input has to be -1, and there is no x that is -1. Be careful. You can't use this one. That's the y value, the output, the answer. So there's no solution, or it can't be determined from the given information. The same thing happens for letter H. This is telling us the y, the output, is -5. There is no -5 in the f of x row. There's one up here, but that's x, and we can't use it. So there's no solution here. The other kind of tricky one was letter F, because there's two answers. Remember, f of x equals -4 is saying, where is f of x equal to 4? And it's equal to 4 in two places, when x is 9 and when x is 8. All right, make sure you jot down any questions you have to ask in class. We are going to complete a lesson on domain and range, and I am going to make another video with part 2.